The news at 9 o'clock. This is Patrick Lunt. British troops backed up by tanks have moved into Basra, Iraq's second city. During the operation, 3 British soldiers sporadic resistance. One report says troops have surrounded the local headquarters of the Ba'ath Party. British commanders say they can now move in and out of the city at will. American military commanders say they control nearly all the roads into the Iraqi capital, Baghdad. There's been heavy fighting around the outskirts of the city. A nighttime curfew has been imposed by the Iraqis. Our correspondent Paul Wood reports from Baghdad, where some of his movements are restricted and words monitored by the Iraqi authorities.
The skies over Baghdad were rarely quiet during the day as American warplanes came in lower and more often than ever before. As a counterpoint to this, the air was punctured by the sound of Iraqi rockets being fired from the centre of the capital. There were also long periods when the air shook with the sound of heavy artillery, what we now believe to be an Iraqi attempt to repulse an American armoured column coming into the western suburbs. The International Committee of the Red Cross says that during the height of the bombardment, hospitals were taking civilian casualties at the rate of 100 an hour.
American forces have launched an investigation into the bombing of a convoy of US and Kurdish troops by an American plane. At least 15 people, including a BBC translator, were killed in the attack near the northern city of Mosul. A convoy of vehicles carrying the Russian ambassador to Iraq has come under heavy fire in Baghdad. Russian television says the vehicles had been passing Iraqi troop positions on the edge of the city. Several people are reported injured. The United Nations has said that nearly 1,000 people could have been killed in a suspected massacre in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Survivors report that more than a dozen villages were attacked by people dressed in military and civilian clothes. Another suspected case of the pneumonia-like virus, SARS, has been reported in Britain. That takes to 5 the number of people who've become ill in the UK. Throughout the world, nearly 100 people have died. More details from our reporter, Nick Thatcher.
The latest probable case of SARS concerns a man who was admitted to hospital in the east of England yesterday. He'd flown home from Taiwan at the end of last month. On Wednesday, a woman who'd returned to Britain from Singapore was taken to a hospital in Manchester. Doctors have reported the patients to the Health Protection Agency as having suspected severe acute respiratory syndrome, otherwise known as SARS. They're both being treated in isolation as a precaution, and the condition of both is described as stable.
Motor racing, and Kimi Raikkonen has been announced the winner of the Brazilian Grand Prix. The event was ended prematurely following a series of accidents on a wet track. BBC News at 3 minutes past 9. Our next at 10.
Good evening, with a very familiar tune at this time on a Sunday evening, but not the voice we're used to. This is Richard Baker, and let me start by thanking you for the many messages of condolence that have come our way since Alan Keith left us, and the kind wishes that have been addressed to me as I pick up the threads as best I can. Alan's departure is a very sad moment in the story of broadcasting, but let's continue his work on an upbeat note, a moment of joy in Wagner's opera Lohengrin, when the hero celebrates his wedding to his beloved Elsa. the prelude to the third act of Wagner's Lohengrin, Klaus Tenstedt conducting the Berlin Philharmonic Orchestra. In the early days of this programme, Alan Keith said his own 100 best tunes extended from Bach to Rodgers and Hammerstein, and that certainly goes for me too. At the age of about 11, I was turned on to Gilbert and Sullivan and queued up happily for the gallery at Sadler's Wells or the Golders Green Hippodrome every time the D'Oyly Carte Company came to town. Here's that delightful character, Owen Brannigan, as the Sergeant of Police in Pirates of Penzance.
When a felon's not engaged in his employment, or maturing his felonious little plans, his capacity for innocent enjoyment is just as great as any honest man. Our feelings we with difficulty smother when constabulary duties to be done. I take one consideration with another. A policeman's lot is not a happy one. When constabulary duties to be done, a policeman's lot is not a happy one. When the enterprising burglar's not a burgling, when the cutthroat isn't occupied in crime, he loves to hear the little brook a-gurgling, and listen to the merry village chime. When the coster's finished jumping on his mother, he loves to lie a-basking in the sun. I take one consideration with another. A policeman's lot is not a nappy one. When constabulary duties to be done, a policeman's lot is not a nappy one.
Owen Brannigan in glorious form as Gilbert and Sullivan's soft-hearted Sergeant of Police. Apart from being introduced to Gilbert and Sullivan, my parents also watched over my early struggles as a pianist. My teacher gave me Beethoven's Pathetic Sonata to work at, I remember. The glorious slow movement quickly became a favourite, and it remained so. How good to hear it played by a great pianist such as Alfred Brentel. the slow movement from Beethoven's Pathetique Sonata, as recorded by Alfred Brendel. Brendel's among the many great musicians I've had the pleasure of interviewing over the years. Another was Sir Adrian Boult, who looked, and indeed was, the perfect English gent, but there was a lot of temperament there too. He could be alarmingly explosive if things didn't go his way. As a young man, he conducted the very first performance of The Planets by Gustav Holst. Holst presented him with the score and wrote on it, "This copy is the property of Adrian Boult, who first caused the planets to shine in public." This is Boult's shining account of Jupiter. Sir Adrian Boult with the London Philharmonic Orchestra giving us Jupiter from The Planets by Gustav Holst. Now, apart from listening to the works of great composers, we thought we'd make a regular feature each week of an outstanding musical performer. This week we've chosen the great prima donna Maria Callas, who was born in New York 80 years ago this year. If you never saw her on stage, you can get an impression of her huge talent as a singing actress on a video of Puccini's Tosca. It was one of the first roles she sang as a girl of 19 in Athens, and the last she sang at Covent Garden in 1965. Her voice wasn't always the most beautiful of instruments, but what tenderness and passion she displays in Visi d'arte. Maria Callas as Puccini's Tosca. What an amazing variety of roles Callas performed in the course of her career, ranging from Wagner's Brunhilde through Verdi and Puccini to earlier Italian masters like Donizetti and Bellini. Many of her roles were intensely dramatic, but she reveals a lighter touch in her recording of Rosina's aria Una voce poco fa from Rossini's The Barber of Seville. Rosina has heard a voice serenading her, and although she's a good, obedient girl as a rule, she says, she is quite determined to meet its owner.
vincerò. Sì, tu giurai. Sì, la vincerò. Il tutto ricuserò, io d'ingegno aguzzerò, alla fezza che terrò.
Gioco
Maria Callas, our great artist of the week, in the aria Una voce poco fa from The Barber of Seville. Now, all the pieces we've heard so far this evening are favourites of mine, but I'm well aware that this programme is called Your 100 Best Tunes, and of course Alan Keith used to have a poll every now and then to discover what your 100 best tunes are. The last was in 1997, and it's time we did it again, so we will, a bit later this year, and I hope you'll let us have your choices on a postcard or on email. In the past, a high place has often gone to the beautiful slow movement of Max Bruch's Violin Concerto in G minor, and here it is now with Maxim Vengerov as soloist. The lovely Adagio from the G minor violin concerto by Max Bruch, played by the marvellous Russian violinist Maxim Vengerov, with the Gewandhaus Orchestra of Leipzig, conducted by Kurt Masur. Music to touch the heart, that. And so, in a different way, is my next choice this evening, the tenor-baritone duet, which was chosen as the best of your 100 best in our two most recent polls and could well win again, Au fond du Temple Saint, in the depths of the Holy Temple, from Bizet's The Pearl Fishers. There are, of course, many recordings of this splendid musical declaration of friendship, but the one many people like best was made way back in 1950 by Jussi Björling and Robert Merrill. The old but greatly loved recording of the duet Au fond du Temple Saint from Bizet's The Pearlfishers, sung by Jussi Björling and Robert Merrill. It'll be interesting to see where that comes in our 2003 list of your 100 best tunes later this year. Now, we're going to end this evening with Sir Hubert Parry's second best-known composition after Jerusalem, the glorious anthem he wrote for the coronation of King Edward VII in Westminster Abbey in August 1902. It's been heard at every coronation since then. It's a very grand setting of Psalm 122, incorporating joyous shouts of greeting to the new monarch in Latin, Vivat Rex or Vivat Regina. It begins, I was glad when they said unto me, we will go into the house of the Lord. Sir Hubert Parry's coronation anthem, I Was Glad, with the massed forces of the choir of King's College, Cambridge, the trumpets of the Royal Military School of Music, and the New Philharmonia Orchestra, conducted by Philip Ledger, to give us a glorious ending to our programme this week. This is Richard Baker. Email address richard.baker@bbc.co.uk, if that's useful to you. And I hope you'll join me again next Sunday as we continue the very long tradition of your 100 Best Tunes, established by Alan Keith 44 years ago. Meanwhile, as I used to say on Melodies for You, producer Bridget Apps joins me in wishing you the best possible week ahead, and goodbye, but just for now.